Hi friends, this is Gina. Over the past few weeks in June 2020, a lot has happened. A social justice movement has finally taken some recognition in our world, which is a fight our brothers and sisters of color have been having for a long time, right under our noses. My journey over these past few weeks has been mainly focused on offering support, educating myself as much as possible, and sharing the mic with others around Black Lives Matter. I used to be someone who didn't share my political views online because I felt like I lived my life full of kindness and without racism. But I quickly learned that that's the majority of what white people are doing, and it's not helpful. Calling out racism in my everyday life, holding those accountable, spreading awareness about racism, and practicing anti-racist activities regularly, even when this quote-unquote trend is over in the media, is what I have been focusing on. I, like many white people, have been scared to share my thoughts and feelings for fear of judgment and my own shame coming to the surface. In the blackout week, I took some reflection time and thought about how I wanted to show up as an advocate for health and for my community. What was my role in this world and in this movement? As a health coach, I help women to not be ashamed of who they are, which directly relates to a feeling that Black individuals are having right now. I also discourage judgment within my clients' hearts towards themselves and show them that fostering a self-loving relationship is so important. Because this is my passion around helping women love themselves fully, I decided to take this role within the Black Lives Matter movement. Black oppression in a white male-dominated world must not be tolerated anymore. I wanted to use my platform to share others' stories and how they are being affected, with hope to inspire people, especially the Black community, to not be ashamed of themselves. Expressing our feelings and emotions through joyful and difficult times is crucial for our mental well-being, and I encourage us all to be brave during this time. I hope that our conversations today can inspire, educate, and motivate you towards change. Enjoy this interview as part of a series that I'll be doing to offer my support through this important time in our history. Hi everyone, I have here Abby Cash and Aysha Rose, dear friends. They work with me at Lululemon, and we are going to just have a little bit of a conversation today about what's happening in the world and a little bit of topics that have been coming up in our culture and the media lately. Right now we have a lot of protesting going on, implementing Black Lives Matter, and kind of starting more of a civil rights movement that we as a society need to realize that this was something that's been happening for a long time, that is being brought up again and again over generations. So welcome Abby Cash and Aysha Rose.
Hi. Hey.
Hey, sorry for the dramatic intro, but I just wanted to give a little bit of context as to like what's happening in the world and how we're feeling. What has been whoever wants to go first, what has been your perspective of with when this first started recently, I guess within the last couple of weeks, and how it's impacted you? Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to ask.
We're so good at this already. Um, well, I think that, like, to be said, I guess for context, I'm half Black and I'm half white, and I was raised in a solely Caucasian family. I married a white man, and I also recently have connected with half of my biological family who is the Black side. So for me, it's been extremely emotional, trying to understand what I guess my role is in the lives of those around me, because I feel as though all of my white family members have either not said anything at all because they don't feel that this is something that pertains to their lives, or some of my white friends and family have looked to me to give them any and all the information that I have. Um, being a mixed person, being biracial, I am working through like my own, I guess, issues of like, I grew up in white culture, but now I feel like I need to be standing up for this culture that I didn't grow up in, because of who I am and because I want to, because I feel like had I just lived in a different household, my whole life would have been different. My most of my life, despite the fact that I am very obviously not only white, have been seen um, as a white woman, and because of that, I've received privileges that I probably wouldn't have received that if I had grown up in a black household in a black community. Um, so I think it's just kind of like put a lot of things into perspective for me. It's put a lot of weight on my voice and who I want to be in this world. I was already in a transition period of like figuring out how to share my voice, and now this has happened and I have had no like prep time. It's go time. Like how can I share my experience and what knowledge I have and what resources I have with the people that need to hear it the most. So yeah, it's been really emotional, and it's been very scary, and I have felt a lot of pressure. I've also felt a lot of love from people very close to me, and a lot of people that I didn't know were the type of friends that they were stand up and stand beside me and not just speak, but show me that they're committed to making this world an equal place, and that they're committed to our friendship and just spreading love and not hate.
I love that, Abby. I love that. What about you, Aisha? How has this impacted you these past couple of weeks?
So it's just I think it's such a deep question because so just to start too, I am also a biracial woman. And being light skinned, I do in certain contexts to certain people, I do definitely have the privileges of being white passing. And I feel like my experience in the world being white passing, I have been able to witness a lot of microaggressions or outward racism from white people, just in the sense that they don't identify and they don't know that I'm a person of color. My father's African American. That is a huge part of that's a huge part of my life. And so I think it's certainly healing in so many ways to see the country mobilize around Black Lives Matter, because I think, in my lived experience, I've never seen this level of like mobilization, this level of care, this level of people really waking up and wanting to be allies and wanting to do their anti-racism work. Um, I'm so thankful for that. I definitely, definitely, I think if you're a person of color right now, um, Black, Indigenous person of color, I really do think that this is a certain activating time for you where your your feelings about this change and shift all the time. I think when everything initially happened, we're just coming off of and still actively going through the coronavirus pandemic. So it just felt like a lot, coronavirus pandemic disproportionately affects Black people, people who are minorities, people who don't have access to care. So feeling the trauma of that and leading into the trauma of police brutality, which has been happening for so long, it was traumatizing. So hard to work, so hard to focus on everyday things. And, looking at George Floyd, I see my father. And I think if you are a white person, you have the privilege of not seeing that. Like, you have the privilege, white people in general, they don't see their family members being executed when they see these sort of things show up on the news. And so I think every white person right now could really stop and really just like let that settle in of like, wow, I don't immediately identify with that. But there are people in my life who do. And like, I'm here with a social responsibility to kind of free them up from the emotional labor of having to carry the black existence, the black lived experience. I want to be an ally. I'm committed to my anti-racism work. And I think I see so much hope in everything. However, I do think it is a lot of challenging the uncomfortableness, and really learning how to communicate dynamically. And I think the power of like self-education right now really, really gives me a lot of hope that we can really transition as a country, because it's just, it's such a hard time. And if you're a black person right now, like, you're traumatized, you're enraged, you're experiencing all of these feelings that you're like, is this healthy? Is this a healthy response to the situation? And, being so committed to my own personal wellness and navigating wellness spaces, it's really opened up like a larger dialogue of how we take care of ourselves and how we take care of each other and how we offer community care in this time.
Wow. What a story. Thank you so much. When you were speaking, it made me think about the word representation so much, because what you were seeing on TV was a representation of the Black community that we are consistently seeing in front of us, and they're being misrepresented on TV and all of our mediums. And I can't say the same about the white community. And what I have been studying and what I have been looking into with my own coaching practice has been the misrepresentation of women and the misrepresentation of specifically like realistic body types and realistic body shapes. And how us as women are misrepresented consistently in the media as over-sexualized, objectified, either really thin, and most of the time they are white, especially in the wellness industry, which I know, Aysha, you're a part of. And that was really disturbing to see or to have that or witness that conversation about how wellness is also not represented in our media. And recently I watched the documentary. I just watched it today. I was telling the girls before the call, the 13th documentary, and which I highly recommend every single person on this planet watch, because there were a lot of things that I, as a white female, with a degree and with all these opportunities and privileges that I've had in my life, have completely just been oblivious to the history of our country and how deeply ingrained this racial system is, whether it's in politics, whether it's in our media, in our laws, and in our families. I think that like with anything, like as a health coach, we know that, eating patterns, mindsets, aggression, calmness, like these are all behaviors that are learned. And I also believe that racism is also a learned behavior, and that it starts in the home. It really does. And it starts with what we're consuming as well. And then for the higher up people, it starts with what is being shown. And again, back to my word, like representation. What is being represented, and is it accurate? Because I really believe that the African American community and people of color in all aspects have not been represented well in our culture. So cool. So when it comes to when I talked about a learned behavior in the home, is there anything in particular growing up that you felt there was a point where you felt different from others? And also like, did your family or parents kind of limit interactions or limit you from other children or other people? Or what was your experience with that growing up?
I can go. I grew up in East Texas. My parents had a boys ranch and a ministry there. At a very young age, there were many different races, and I wouldn't necessarily like there was different cultures, but I think that it was all under the branch of like Christianity, and a lot of those people that were interacting with our family were interacting with the ministry. So from like birth to probably 4, I was exposed to a lot of different ethnicities. And then after that, my family didn't have any friends of color at all. So from a very young age, like after 4, I was always perceived as different because I was the only person. I was the only female other than my mother, that I was around, which was hard. And I was the only person of color that I really interacted with. I was homeschooled, so my community was very, very small. I don't think that my family intentionally limited my interaction with people of color, but they didn't seek it out. And from a very young age, I heard my grandparents use terms like colored people. My brother's nickname for me was Fro Baby because of my hair, and just like a lot of language that wasn't outright aggressive, but just like Aysha was saying, like because I have been white passing, I have heard a lot of microaggressions, and like that is very confusing to grow up in because you're being taught to not like a part of who you are, or to feel differently about a part of who you are. And now as an adult, I'm not like, if you are just now meeting me, I'm not white passing. Like I have dark skin and really big curly hair. It is very clear that I'm not only white, but I still have to cope with all of these things that I never learned how. Like I never learned how to love the fact that I was Black. I never learned how to love my hair from my family because no one around me loved it in a constructive way. It was pointed out as like a difference, and while they didn't perceive that they were pointing it out in a like negative way, the fact that they were pointing it out in such a abundant way made me feel like it was negative because it made me feel different. So I think my interaction now with the Black community is kind of a challenge for me because I don't know exactly how I fit there. I do feel like I've always been met with open arms, but it's just hard for me to throw myself into it because of the way that I was raised. I was only raised around white people essentially. And it's hard when I like to have a desire and not feel the same connection because I wasn't taught to form those connections.
Absolutely. And I find I have some other friends that are also biracial, and they really feel like they don't know where they belong and don't fit in any culture. And I'm sure you guys can both resonate with that a lot. And of course, like this movement is all about one race, which is so important. But I think what took me back to this documentary that I learned from so recently was we want to go away from a concept of criminalization to humanitization, because it is a human issue. And in order to bring up a community, no matter what the color or race or ethnicity is, we have to be able to communicate and live with each other and treat each other on a human level first, and connect as an us as opposed to a them, um, which I'm sure you guys see in the media right now, like these people, them. I think when we use that sort of language, it really like increases the segregation sometimes, as opposed to bringing people closer and saying us, we, um, and we're all humans, and this is a human being issue. So yeah, I don't know how that feels, but I have definitely heard from other friends that have multiple races and ethnicities that it is an issue that they're struggling with, and I think that that we need to be looking at it from a human standpoint as well. What about you, Aysha?
Do you mind repeating that whole question for me again?
Yes. So I guess what I was asking was, in the home, were there any like taught behaviors, anything, any point in your life where you felt different from others, or anything like family or parents like limited you from like talking to anyone or doing things, or anything that you felt was different?
So I love this question because I think that there's so many layers to it, and I think it is so deep. I think really for me, in my lived experience, the sort of separation and the division happened more outside of the home. So I think when you take a look at like systemic issues, when you take a look at like K through 12 education, um, basically anything that required me to branch outside of my family of origin, that's where I really experienced discrimination. That's when I realized, like, oh, I am different. Oh, people are reacting to me. And I think I had the experience of growing up in different areas, different socioeconomic um I don't know why I like brain farted there, but different areas, suburban areas. I think that that's where I witnessed the most discrimination, especially in neighborhoods that were, you know, typically like more white families. That's definitely where I noticed, like, oh wow, I'm different. People are interacting to me differently. They have something to say about the color of my skin, the texture of my hair. Um, and so I think for me, I learned not to love myself through our culture, our internalized racism. This is a nationwide problem. This is so ingrained in our history, and I think it's that lack of education around like what America is founded on. You know, it's founded on slave labor. It's founded on separating families for labor. There's really so many ugly things that we as a country, we have to grapple with, and it's going to be uncomfortable work, and it's going to be so necessary. But I think for me too, like I think people who have been more like subjected to like redlining, and people who have grown up in more urban centers where it still feels very segregated, I can say maybe in those families they do experience more of that, like us versus them, more of that pressure. But I think growing up in a multiracial home, that was kind of like the safe haven from the world. Like it was completely normal. I could be myself. I could you know have multiple identities. I could go ahead and explore that. And while I didn't grow up with like a handbook of like, here's how to be Black, here's how to celebrate your culture, here's how to understand the different like
It'd be really nice if they had that, right?
yes, that would be really nice. I think that I wasn't prepared for um my father is such a loving father, and he really is just so so grounded and so protective that I didn't learn about police brutality. I didn't learn that I should mistrust white people. That was not something taught to me. Absolutely not. I didn't learn until I witnessed how people interacted to us together, how people discriminated against my dad. Um, Being white passing, I had that experience of like sometimes not being discriminated against, sometimes being wildly discriminated against. But it became real for me, my race, and seeing other people react to my father's presence, discriminating. He's always had trouble, with if an officer has to talk to him routine traffic stop, routine in air quotes, it gets escalated. It's automatically, there's an underlying assumption that because of his race, he will be more aggressive. And it's just, there has to be so much reform in our police, our police headquarters. Like there's so much larger work that needs to be done. But that was the long answer of what I've experienced.
It was such a good answer as well.
Can I tag back in?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, I just I guess I want to just like point out the differences of like Aysha and I's upbringing, and like what I think like foundationally was different was like what we learned in our homes and what children are being taught in their homes. Like it really like resonated with me of her saying like people's reaction to her was what taught her that she was different. And I think that you don't come out listing off your own characteristics and comparing them to other people. You come out just being a person moving through the world until someone tells you that you are different. Like why would you know? I had a lot of experiences growing up, and I grew up in a very rural area, but it was still very diverse. I want to say that my high school was like not 50-50, but it was like close with like there was less Black people than there were white people, but there were also Hispanic people thrown into that mix. But so much of what my high school experience was like, oh, we can be friends at school, we can hang out at school, but I don't know how my parents will feel. And like, I'm okay with you here, but I can't bring you to my home because you're not welcome there. And like, that is 100% learned behavior. And like, why? Clearly the people that were saying this didn't really believe that, but they were taught that this person's is different and they're not okay with us. Like, I won't ever forget my freshman year. I started high school without ever stepping foot in a public school before that day. So like, mind you, I was already traumatized just by being there. But I remember I had this really great friend, and like, not to discredit his character by any means, loved him to death. He's no longer with us, but he told me that I was the prettiest girl that he had ever seen in his whole life, and he sure would like to date me, but there's no way that he could bring me home to his mama.
Oh,
I'm
Lord.
like, how sad for me, but like also how sad for you that you had to grow up in a home that wasn't loving in that way. Okay, that is all that I have to say on that
The
note.
end. So true. I love what both of you guys said. It made me think of my own experience as a white person, and like it made me think about my childhood and like what little like moments you learn from, because essentially you are a sponge when you're younger, and like you said, Aysha, like, you know, you didn't experience that you were different until you went out and experienced the world reacting to you and your family, because you are essentially in this little bubble in your home. And it made me think about where I grew up, and it was and the things that people were saying to me, like, oh, you know, this is a good part of town, and like this is a bad part of town. Okay, well, what makes it a bad part of town? And I noticed that there was a lot of people of color living there. And does that make it a bad part of town? You know, you start asking those questions of like, what does this dialogue even mean? And what biases do you have around that? And I did go to a high school that was relatively mixed cultures, but again, not enough. And I did live in like a better area, and the schools were pretty good, good, quote unquote. Um, and essentially, like, I thought that by having mixed races in my school, that it was a quote unquote good school, because I felt like it was inclusive. But then I remember that, you know, I live in an area that maybe other people don't have access to. So during that conversation that you guys were just having, it made me think about accessibility, which is something also that they bring up in this movie, which is like, what are the differences of privilege? And with privilege comes accessibility, and who has access to what, um, and why. And yeah, it made me think about my own experience and what I've had access to. And I did not grow up with a lot of money at all. We had hardly any money. And I found that even just being a little bit on the poorer side, I lost accessibility to things, or I was viewed as different in certain ways. Um, and and I just noticed that you're treated differently when you don't have access to experiences. And I'm sure that that is something so common um, in this culture, because a lot of people of color do not have access to the things that I would deem as necessary, essential. And that's something that the Wellness Co. also mentioned about the wellness industry, how it's not accessible either. So, what are your thoughts on the accessibility of a quote unquote good life, and how that is represented in the world?
Oh, I have so much to say about this because I think it's definitely one of my passions is like, how can we commit to doing anti-racism work in the wellness industry? How can we create opportunity? And I think it starts with naming it for what it is and saying we are doing anti-racism work in the industry, because I think we can really, it's very easy to say we're trying to be more inclusive, we're trying to bring in diversity, we're trying to bring in opportunities. But I think the major failing is not calling it on what it is and saying we're doing anti-racism work. We are acknowledging that medical discrimination happens for African American communities. It is a real thing. It is a problem in our country. And I think it really does start with that. And that's what creates, you know, a good life for people. And that's what definitely I don't know, that's what helps create that accessibility in wellness spaces. And like, you have to think too, I think any white person really has to think about the lived experience of Black, Indigenous people of color. When I am interacting with someone, it's typically not related to who I am as a person, what are my values, the line of questioning that comes when you meet someone. Like, as a person of color, I'm expected to declare myself. So basically the first question is to, like, what kind of brown are you? I need to know so that I can determine how I speak to you. And it does happen a lot in the wellness industry. It totally happens in yoga spaces. Um, we are reacted to differently. And if I, as a light skinned person with that privilege, if I'm still having that experience, I can only imagine what, my darker African American brothers and sisters are experiencing when they're trying to go into these spaces. They're definitely feeling uncomfortable. And I think there's so much around, there's so much that we can do. If we're thinking of yoga, like, how can we honor the tradition of yoga, of where it came from? you know Most yoga studios are white owned. They are not Indian owned. And I think really calling in the lineages and doing that education and sharing with people where things come from, definitely starts. But I think too, just acknowledging, that the people who are, it's really about framing that commitment. I think, like, saying that you're committed to doing anti-racism work. And I also think too, it really kind of goes into, sorry, I'm thinking of my next thought. As a person of color this year, I really was more honed into, I think, with coronavirus and just in general, my own self-education. I realized that, like, wellness in Black communities is so important to me. Wellness in any minority community is really important to me. And I've begun to really support healers, coaches, studios, those people who directly call out, even on their pages in their bio, and they say, like, I'm committed to doing anti-racism work. I acknowledge the inequity. I am offering for this workshop 50% off if you're a Black, Indigenous person of color. Just anything that they can do to demonstrate access in a way that, like, dignifies the person who needs that access. You have to think too of, like, opportunity in our process, like applying for scholarships to go to school, applying for any sort of funding. You typically have this rigorous process where, as a Black, Indigenous person of color, like, you are going directly into your trauma to talk about, like, how unstable things were growing up for you, the discrimination you experienced, the lack of opportunity that's bringing you to ask for a scholarship. And that process can feel, like, really undignified. Like, it can feel like you just have all of your values, all of, like, who you are. It doesn't even hold a candle to your talents because you're having to go through this rigorous process of self-disclosure. And I think it's so much about honoring your commitment, saying, this is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm committed to anti-racism work. This is how I'm committed to supporting my clients, reaching out to them during times like this and saying, like, I value you. I know that I don't have your lived experience, and I just want to hold a space for you of support. And I want to know how you're feeling. Like, those gestures mean everything because we aren't feeling okay. And we're existing in a world where we have to basically, like, operate and walk on eggshells around everyone else's privilege. So it's so hard to say, it is excruciating and painful and traumatic, and I cannot work today because I'm in so much pain, because you're, like, there is no space for that. And so just knowing that, the people in your lives have so many restrictions that, like, maybe you're unaware of, maybe white people are completely unaware of, and just knowing, like, wow, their experience is so different from mine, and I am, like, in full support. Like, I think vocalizing that support is just the most important thing, and just saying, like, I am here for these people 100%. That was my long answer also.
I love your long answers. Don't think I hate them. I love them. What about you, Emmy?
Um, I was just like sitting here and like thinking about what Aisha was saying, and like I guess like my experience with like access has been like different, but also like I don't even think that I can begin to describe what it means to like not have access because of my upbringing and because of the privileges that I had. I can say that in every quote unquote wellness space that I have ever entered, it has been abundantly clear that I was either the only person of color or one of two or three. Growing up as a performer, I did not see a person on stage that looked like me until after I graduated from high school. I did grow up dancing with some girls on my dance team. They were from incredibly wealthy families. I was not from an incredibly wealthy family, but somehow it was easier for my family to get there than it was for other families of color. But just like having, it's not just about like, can you go here or not? Can you do this or not? It's, are you welcome here? And when you walk into a space and there's no one that looks like you, it's the most isolating feeling, because the first thing that you think is, do I belong here? And if it's something that you're passionate about, or if it's something that you are desperately in need of, you should never have to question whether you belong to be able to take up that space. And like, I have done yoga for the majority of my life. I've been a Pure Barre taker and a Pure Barre instructor. And I personally have taken it probably 5 studios across the world, not just our country. I've been taught by one person of color, and I've seen one face on their advertisement in studio, and it's the same girl in every studio. And like, that's just already unwelcoming. So like, how are you supposed to branch out, or how are you supposed to participate in these activities when you don't see anyone else that looks like you or know that you're welcome? And like, a lot of this like goes back to financial disparities and access to like travel and things like that, but those have to be addressed, I guess, before we can even get to that point. Like, if you look at like your hierarchy of needs, like, so many people of color have to work so hard and be so focused on such a base level of need that like mental health can't be a priority, taking care of your body can't be a priority, engaging in activities that just like fill your cup artistically or whatever else are not a priority, because they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to like make it through each day. Okay, they're trying to most likely take care of many other people despite how old they are. And we don't take that into consideration of like, how, as a person that is going into mental health, like, how can I better target that? How can I better serve this population that is dealing with so much trauma but can't afford to even address it? Like, how can we not only just declare that we are doing anti-racism work, but like go into these communities and really participate in it and do it in a dignified way? It does, like, you're not giving someone a handout by treating them as human and by seeing their disparities and their struggle. Like, you're just doing the work that you are responsible to do because of your privilege. The first day I ever walked onto my college campus to start, I was a part of our minority scholarship there, which I will say that all of the scholarships that I received were based, I had one dance scholarship, but everything else was based on minority and low income. And in order to get those scholarships, you do have to lay your soul bare in every every disparity that you have ever had, or anything that could make you seem more in need of this money, you have to lay it all out. And it's really, it feels like you're being exploited, so that one day that they can be like, look what we've done. I went to a private university for my first 2 years, and to be able to go there, I applied for the Gates Millennium Scholarship, which would have been a full ride had I gotten it. And I had to write 2 to 5 page essays, all with prompts of like, how have you struggled because of your low income or ethnicity? Like, it's all very degrading and not helpful. And then I didn't get it. So I spent days and days and days pouring my heart out on paper, and I got nothing out of it. I became a finalist. So like, great, pat on the back. Out of 25,000 applicants, I made it to the top 100 something, and I'm still going to college with all of these loans. Anyway, beside the point, when I went to college, the one thing that was very impressed upon me by our scholarship director was that to whom much is given, much is required. And I feel that by the sheer fact that we have a population of people that is so privileged, and a population of people that is so oppressed and so disadvantaged, that as white people, it is 100% our responsibility to be leading the change for these people that we have essentially walked all over for hundreds of years. Like, we wouldn't have privilege if it wasn't for the Black community, if it wasn't for those ancestors that labored in the hot sun, that were ripped from their own countries to come here, that were born into slavery, that never saw a free day in our life. We would not have the privilege that we have. So it is 100% our responsibility to do whatever it takes to give up our power for the sake of theirs, to go into those communities and do whatever work we have to do to make this an equal playing field.
I felt like I just went to church. Amen, Abby. Amen. Yes, that was one of the biggest things that that affected me in this documentary. And I keep going back to this documentary because, again, like, I didn't know any of this was happening, and they talk a lot about how white people in general are ignoring and disregarding like the historical context of this oppressive system, and that the system just keeps changing. It hasn't been fixed. It hasn't been acknowledged. It hasn't been abolished. It's just changing in different ways. And one of the gentlemen says is, this has always been happening. Like, what's currently happening in the world, it's always been happening. The only difference from back then today is that we have media to record it and make it accessible to everyone. And it actually forces a conversation about it, which I found was so powerful when he said that. Is like, nobody was questioning it back then. No one was putting it out there, but at least we have today and this time to be able to be forced into that conversation. And people need to take personal responsibility, and people are, requesting that, which I think is powerful, and I think is a lot better than what it was. But I do think that, again, we for so many years have been ignoring and putting blinders on, which is something from the Zoom call that I went to as well that they mentioned, putting blinders on as to like, oh, this is a problem that is so like bad and so harsh. Like, I don't want to contribute. I don't want to be involved. And I think that is the wrong way to go. And we could say that about not only racism, but, being in the wellness industry, I've seen it with environmentalism. I've seen it with, women's rights, women's representation. I've seen it with like many other things, poverty, things happening in other countries, war, terrorism. People just want to put their blinders on. People just want to ignore what's happening because it's hard and because it's difficult and traumatic. But, we feel like we have a choice. And unfortunately, like you said, people of color and people who deal with this every day don't have a choice. They don't have a choice to be able to walk away and step down and say, I don't want to deal with this right now. Or this is too hard, because they don't have a choice. And that is something that I believe that we need to do more of moving forward, is to just stop ignoring what's happening and to self-educate, and not only talk about what we're going to do moving forward, but also what I did today was watch this documentary and figure out where we came from, and like why it is the way that it is today because of all of these things that have occurred. Not just slavery, not just Jim Crow laws and civil rights movements, but also things that have happened recently that I really was not educated on, that I didn't realize was happening. And yeah, that's really what I think that we should be focusing on is stop ignoring what's happening, and just acknowledge it. So my last question is what advice would you give to, I guess, 3 pieces of advice. What advice would you give to people of color? What advice would you give to white communities? And what advice would you give to all of humanity around these issues that are happening right now? It's a loaded question, I know. I'm sorry. It's a lot.
Like the 3 largest questions I've ever been asked in my life.
Good. No pressure.
I think to people of color, I would say like take care of your mental health. Like you can't push forward if you have nothing left to give. I only have a taste of what the anger and pain and fear that you must feel on a daily basis. But also, like, this is our time to lead by example. And though you're angry, try to be open and try to be positive about the change that is happening. Don't just ignore it, because you, and rightfully so, have a chip on your shoulder from years and years of oppression. Like, acknowledge that, but also acknowledge like what is happening so that more of it will happen. I guess like to white communities, I would say just like take time and like reflect on your life and ask yourself the hard questions. Ask yourself like why you feel the need to reach out to your one Black friend. Why do you only have one Black friend? Like what has been afforded to you by your ancestors, and think about what has been afforded to people of color by their ancestors, and what has been afforded to you by their ancestors, and just take a second to like feel the weight of that, and to know that you do have responsibility in this, but it's not something that we know you all didn't actively choose to participate in racism. So actively choose to participate in anti-racism to make up for all of the actions you didn't intend to choose. and to humanity in general, because I talk to them all the time.
So good.
I would just say, look what we can accomplish when we are together. Yesterday, I sat in a sea of people of all different shades, of all different ages, of all different socioeconomic backgrounds, of all different cultures. And I sat in solidarity with my community, and I sat and listened to how we can make our community better, regardless of what color we are, regardless of where we came from, regardless of what part of town we live in. And like, that is so powerful, to just be there for someone else. Like, I know how much support and how much love I felt by just sitting next to people that were different from me. And like, what can you learn from that? Like, don't disregard the color of other people's skin, because like, that is part of who they are, and that is part of what makes them unique and part of what they bring to the world. Don't negate that, because it's beautiful and you can learn so much. And some of my favorite memories have been getting a window into the way that other people live, or the culture, or the heritage, or it's so beautiful, and it will enrich your life in ways that you never thought. So just be open to it.
Damn, mic drop. That was good. Aysha, what about you, girl?
I have so much to say.
Oh my God, I can't wait. Get your coffee.
So I think for Black, Indigenous people of color, especially if we're talking about the timeliness of coronavirus, the pandemic, and the mobilization of Black Lives Matter, and how big of a movement and the police brutality that's currently going on. This is a long battle, and right now it is so important to lean on your resources that you do have and see how you can kind of expand in your network, because you will need space holders, you will need people to speak to, you will need Black, Indigenous people of color healing circles. Like, you will need that outlet. You will need to be involved in diversity inclusion practices that can hold your experience without you feeling like there will be a penalty. Because right now it may feel like you are in trouble just for being a minority, that you are an agitator, that you're a thug. Like, this is the dialogue that's happening in our country. And right now, the best thing you can do for yourself is not internalize that hatred, and to really, really lean in and be honest with the people who are reaching out and saying, how are you feeling? Maybe in the past, when white people have come to you asking how you're feeling, you maybe haven't been able to feel like you could disclose how you're truly feeling, or that it would be a game of comparison, because that's honestly, it's very common when that happens, when that's kind of how it turns into. That's the flow of the conversation that can happen very commonly. Just know that the people who are reaching out are trying, and the conversations will not be perfect, but try to recognize the intent and take that glimmer of hope and run with it, because you need that right now. And filling your cup in any way possible is just so important, because this is definitely a long battle. It may feel like a lot happened in the span of 2 weeks, but we are in this for the long haul. We definitely want to see social change. So find your space holders, lean into the people who are reaching out, and be honest and transparent about how you're feeling, because it's super important. For white people, I would say it's really important to do your resourcing around white fragility. So definitely read the book. But in general, I think that you should know that if you're attempting to reach out to people of color, if you're attempting to engage in this work now, know that if you have experiences of guilt and shame coming up for you, you have to know that when it is happening around people of color, when you're interacting with them, when you're attempting to help, and maybe it doesn't seem like they are open to it yet, the guilt and the shame and those negative feelings you feel, that is your own work to kind of process and internalize, not one person saying, and not one person of color leaning into that and giving you affirmations or doing stuff around that is ever going to take away the shame. It is something that you're going to have to carry and process on your own, because people of color have already processed that. They've already experienced discrimination. They've already experienced like all of these complex feelings. So their like cycle of evolution around that work is just like that progress. They're just a little bit farther down the road than you. And so I think, like, too, it's just, I think it's so much about shifting the language of the oppressor too, and just really taking ownership over saying, I feel this way. I am committed to doing this work. Um, I think not speaking in generalizations, but really giving your personal action steps of like, this is important to me. The experiences of the people around me are important to me, and being willing to take on that energy of like, this is what I value. This is what is important to me, even if it divides family members who don't agree, your community, your employees, your whatever your circumstances. I think it's so easy to see social media posts and online engagement as performative, when in my lived experience, what I've witnessed is a lot of people not calling out their peers. It's always the person of color in the room who has to say, I'm uncomfortable with that. It's never the white person defending and saying, that's not my values. I don't know what you're bringing to town, but that's totally not okay. And let me shut that shit down. I apologize for my cursing, but
We like cursing here.
yes. But I think really being that person in the room, I know personally of how many years I spent on this planet with no one defending me, with no one saying that is not okay. I've had to be that person who stands up and says, even if it's not for my minority group, saying like, it's actually like post 9/11, like it's not okay that we say this about Muslims. Like I've always had to stand up and be a voice for people who are marginalized. And I really, really just like, I want to see that love and that care from white people who are willing to just speak up and say, this is not okay. Here's how I'm committed to doing the work. And here's how I'm committed to supporting the people of color in my life. Like, it really is like, that is such a sweet medicine for people who are suffering, for Black people who are suffering, for African American communities that are suffering, not just riding the social media wave, not just riding the movement, but really like looking into your own behaviors and biases and just educating. Like, white fragility is, almost everybody experiences that, especially when they're beginning this work as a white person. So it's very normal, and just like resourcing yourself around that and not expecting Black people to process your guilt and shame, I think is really, really important. And I think that's really all that I have to say is like, if you are showing up in allyship, if you are challenging yourselves, know that it may feel like this work is going unnoticed right now, but we really deeply appreciate it. Um, and I think the reservation and recognizing it is not wanting to just feed that and give an affirmation and then that stops. It's really wanting to see that action, because I think for so long people have said and declared things for their audience on social media, but not really followed through with it. So if you are not receiving that direct like feedback, like please continue doing your work. Like it literally is, you have to remember it's not about you right now. And I think it's so important for you to just continue to show up and take those action steps and do what you can. And I think for the world at large, I really want people to really think about leadership. Like think about leadership and really think that right now, and remember that the number one thing that we should be expecting from our leaders is accountability. We need people who are in leadership who are saying, I will not look away from the horror of what is happening in the world. I will not let this happen. I don't care if this impacts me financially. I don't care if this impacts me socially. I don't care if this impacts me emotionally. I stand for this values, and I'm willing to sacrifice my own discomfort, my own privilege to go out there and put myself out there for people and to be accountable and transparent and responsible to the people I serve. That is the number one thing. And that means voting, and that means being involved locally in your communities and making sure that in your places of employment, in your government, in every single, like in your police, in your police departments, every single aspect, like there are so many people that we swear in and that we vote for. And by not participating, you are basically giving those people a free pass. There's no accountability. And I think that our positions of leadership in this country and all throughout the world, they need to be people who will not look away from horror, will not look away from pain. They cannot be bought. There's no price that will take away their integrity, that will take away their values, and that will take away their own commitment to their personal evolution and their work. Like they cannot be bought at the end of the day. Like that's all that it is. They are here for their people and they are here to serve, and they understand the full impacts of what service looks like. Is service is sacrifice. You are sacrificing things for the greater good. It does not come with comfort. It doesn't come like you abandon your privilege. Everything that protected you to get you to where you are in a position of leadership, like you are there for the people. And I think that that is so important all throughout the world, is like knowing that the people who are letting this happen right now are people who do not have accountability. Their values can be bought and sold, and they are not here in service to the people. They are here for self-service. There's no personal growth or evolution, and they're simply just not willing to do that work. And so I think it's really important that we just get involved and really just do everything we can to not allow these people to run our society. Like that's really it.
So good. And when you said these people are running, they're for the people, it's like all people, not just one group of people, right? Because I feel like they are benefiting only one group of people and not everyone. So that's so important. The leadership has been something brought up a lot on Facebook and Instagram and in conversations. It's people are looking for leaders, and people are looking for someone to guide them, and they can't find it. So that's why it is so important to vote, and to not only vote physically, but like vote with your support, with your money, with your time. That's a big one, especially in the wellness industry. They always say, vote with your dollars, vote with your money, and buy and support products and services that are doing good in the world. And it's the same for anything. It's the same for leadership. It's how you run your country. It's, what you're being taught, all of that. So, if you can't vote, if you don't have any money to spend on those things, obviously like supporting people with your words and with your time is also really valuable. And speaking of time and valuable, I appreciate both of you so much. I feel like this conversation was so valuable, and I got to see both of you guys' perspectives, and just such amazing perspectives that I feel like people need to hear. And it's just something that we need to continue to look into and have conversations about openly, and not be afraid of them. So I really, really appreciate both of you today.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for taking time and being open to listen and learn and just be with us in this.
Oh, I love you both so much.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this beautiful interview from my two dear friends. If you enjoyed this, please share it with others, and hopefully it inspired you and motivated you towards change and towards doing things differently in your own life. If you enjoyed this episode, please click the like, because this is my very first YouTube experience and I would really, really appreciate your support. If you have any other questions, feel free to private message me. And thanks so much, guys.